Hey guys, back again with another video, another review. Time to get back on the review train here. No game to show here because I actually borrowed this game. It's a game pretty much everyone's been playing. Everyone's pretty much finished it by now, and that's Spider-Man on the PS4. I borrowed this game from a friend. I didn't actually buy it. I wasn't actually that interested in it, at least not at full price. This year I've kind of decided to kind of not buy as many games. Just maybe like a couple games per month, like one or two per month. Just games I really have to play immediately. And Spider-Man was one of those games that I was like, oh, I can just borrow this because I know a lot of people that are gonna buy this game. And it's one of those games that like most people that play it end up getting a platinum trophy. Like almost 10% of people that play Spider-Man have the Platinum Trophy, which is extraordinarily high, actually, because it's actually really easy to do and it's fairly painless. And it's one of the few games I've played where 100%ing it is actually fun and like reasonable. Which I'll get to that when I talk about the gameplay, I guess. But yeah, I finished it like a couple weeks ago. I know, a week ago now, I would say. A little later than most people. And I gotta say, I was pleasantly surprised by Spider-Man on the PS4. I'm not okay. As some people may know, I'm not like a huge Marvel guy. I don't read comic books. I don't like Marvel movies like at all. The last one I saw was like Infinity War, and I hadn't even watched like for the previous Avengers movies at all. And Infinity War was like not bad. I didn't hate it or anything, but I was kind of like, eh. I don't know. I just have no interest in Marvel. It's just not my thing. So yeah, I'm not attached to Spider-Man as a character. I've seen the 3 Tobey Maguire movies. Back when they came out, I remember kind of liking them. I guess not the third one. The third one I hated. I remember that. I mean most people hate the third one. I didn't see the Andrew Garfield ones, which apparently people hate anyways. Homecoming apparently is really good. I should probably actually watch that because I don't know. Playing this game made me actually a little more interested in the character, which is a good thing. I think that's something they want to kind of do is for people that aren't too familiar with the character to kind of it makes them a little more invested. And if you are attached to the character, from what I've heard, I actually do a pretty good job here. In fact, a lot of people are saying this is probably one of the best interpretations of the character, at least as far as the comics would go. Interesting thing with this game is it's funny, like they really put a lot of effort into it. Insomniac Games was responsible for this, and I've liked pretty much every game that they've put out, even though I haven't played a lot of them. I didn't play Sunset Overdrive, for instance. I haven't played a lot of the Ratchet & Clank games, only a couple of them. Obviously, you have something like Spyro the Dragon, which I love. That first Spyro game. Very much looking forward to the trilogy that's coming out soon. But yeah, they put a lot of effort into this, and it really shows. And you can tell that the Insomniac, the team there, cared about the character and making sure they got it right, and didn't want to upset like the fans. Because from what I've seen, people that love Spider-Man are really happy with what they did with the character and how they kind of present its story, which I guess we'll kind of start with that. I'm coming at this as someone that's not like super into Spider-Man. So the story is kind of weird, where it's kind of separated into 3 acts, and each act almost kind of has its own storyline, and then they kind of all connect together in the end with Act 3, and I'm gonna try to avoid spoilers here, but each act, like the first act has its own villain essentially, and the first act there's really not too much of the story, but then it gets a little more interesting towards the end, where villains kind of like get together in a way. But there's a lot of different like side things going on with the story. Obviously, you're kind of like helping Aunt May with the homeless shelter as Peter Parker. You got Mary Jane stuff. Mary Jane kind of plays into the story a little bit as well. It's a little tough to talk about it without getting into spoilers. I mean, It's you've got Doctor Octavius as well. Like that's part of the story where you're kind of helping him with his, I guess, projects, his science type projects. I don't know. There's a lot of like different references to like the comics, from what I understand at least, the comics, and then obviously the movies as well. All of the stuff in this game is are things that are in the comics. It's I don't know. It's a little tough to talk about it without spoiling anything, and then also, I'm not too familiar with the character or the comics, so it's like hard to say different things. So it's kind of weird, but all I will say is that it's surprisingly emotional at the end. Like the very end of this game is shockingly emotional. I was kind of surprised by it, and I like Peter Parker as a character in this game. He's kind of apparently like what he is in the comics, so he's very like a do-gooder. He's just always wanting to help people, and I admit sometimes it can get a little over the top. I mean, like Peter Parker is so perfect, and it kind of annoys me sometimes. And I don't know. I mean, yeah, he's a nerd. Obviously, he's like this nerdy character, but in this game, he's like super like attractive, and he's he's like super muscular. Like he's like extremely well built in this, which I don't think that's really what he's like in the comics, or in fact even the movies that have come out as well. So that was kind of an interesting thing. Mary Jane, I can't really talk about that much because I don't know. Apparently, she's actually kind of different in this than she usually is. She felt like a real character, though, in this, like a real person. And sometimes you even play as her. And I don't know. It's weird. It's hard to talk about the story with this game. I do like what they've kind of done with Peter Parker. He's a fairly likable guy, and he's got a lot of quips, like funny quips, which seems to be in line with the character from what I've seen. The dialogue is really snappy. It's really fun. It's just, I don't know, the story can be a little messy, I guess, because it just goes all over the place with so many different characters and kind of like little plot threads. And some of them don't really go anywhere, but then some others connect, and then with some villains they do a pretty good job at providing like an understandable character arc, and then others it's a little sloppy. But what they do with, I guess I would say, the main villain, like so the final boss fight of the game, I'm not going to spoil who it is. They did a really good job with that, and it's surprisingly emotional at the end. And yeah, I gotta say I was fairly invested with the character and what was going on in the cutscenes and things like that. Which, yeah, I mean that's amazing that they were able to do that for someone like me that just doesn't really care about the character all that much. As far as comic book characters, like even as someone that doesn't like comic books that much, Spider-Man is pretty low on the totem pole for me. But let's move on to the gameplay. Open world game, open world Manhattan. The attention to detail is absolutely astonishing. Like it very much is like real life Manhattan in this game, and it's got a similar open world structure to basically every open world game you've played in the last 10 years. It's not doing anything extraordinarily new, but open world games for me, I think one of the key components to make a successful world game is traversal has to be fun and engaging. And Spider-Man, it nails it because of the web slinging. Previously, I think the best game for this was Spider-Man 2. From what I've heard, I didn't play that game, but from what I've heard, it was a little more complex with the controls. It required a little more finesse and skill, I guess. In this game, you're generally just kind of holding the R2 button and kind of swinging around and auto attaching to different buildings. You can kind of press R1 to give yourself a little boost, and you can kind of like get higher up in the air if you kind of are a little more deliberate with your R2 and R1 presses. You can kind of like run up the buildings. The sense of speed is spectacular, and there's just enough control. Like it doesn't feel too automated. is kind of what I'm getting at here. There's enough control to make it satisfying, especially when you do some of the mini games. Like there's gonna be like these challenges where you gotta like go fast and pick up these bombs and kind of like destroy them, but you have to get to them in a really fast time to get like the gold medals, and that's where you actually have to be good with web slinging around the city. You can't just keep holding R2 and expect to get a good time there. You actually have to master the swinging controls, which they're easy to learn, difficult to master. It's that kind of thing, but it's fun. It's just a total blast to just go like fly around through the city with its great sense of speed, and then how it plays into the combat is really good as well. But you basically have your main story missions, which you always have your waypoint showing you where they are. You have your side missions. There's not too many. And then there's a bunch of activities you can do. So getting 100% in this game, like I mentioned earlier, is actually really easy because everything is shown on your mini-map. You can make a waypoint for everything. You don't have to do any kind of like needle in a haystack type searching that you have to do in every other open world game. And I really do appreciate that. I think I don't like it when games, like especially open world games with these massive environments, make you search for like a needle in a haystack as a collectible. So the side activities in this game are hit and miss. Like there's some good ones. Like some of the challenges can be fun. I like there's challenges where you gotta get gold, silver, or bronze medals. There's combat ones. Stealth ones are a little more frustrating, but I eventually got kind of used to them. And then there's the bomb ones where you have to find bombs and kind of like grab them and throw them away. There's like these drone ones where you have to like chase this drone throughout a city, going through these like checkpoints essentially. Those ones I actually really liked. I thought those were fun. Again, you kind of have to master the swinging controls to get good at those challenges. There's a bunch of like hideouts that you'll find which are pretty bland. You basically just have to fight waves of enemies without dying. And the enemies get progressively harder throughout the waves, and you can kind of like start off by doing like stealth attacks and things like that to avoid having to fight every single enemy. So that's the kind of thing, you've seen that kind of thing in games before. There's, what else is there? Most of them are kind of forts. There's these, what do you call them? They're like these not lab levels, but it's Harry Osborn like has like these stations throughout the city, and basically each one has its own kind of mission. I think these are probably the best ones in the game because they're all pretty varied. One might have you like flying above the city, going through these like toxic clouds to kind of like, I forget what you're doing. I don't know. There's a lot of like mumbo jumbo, like science mumbo jumbo talk with like a lot of these side missions. I have no idea what you're actually doing in them, but the actual like what you're actually doing in these missions though is pretty varied. So you might be doing that, or you might be spraying like this like powder on different parts of the environment to like just like kind of get rid of like this toxin that's going throughout the city. There's one where you have to like catch pigeons throughout the city, which is surprisingly fun. I don't want to spoil all of these Harry Osborn activities, but they're probably the best ones in the games because each one is different from the last, and it's not just combat. It's not just, oh, you're doing combat. You have to actually, there's a lot of like different activities you're doing essentially. There's street crimes, which, there's not too many of them. Sometimes you might have to rescue civilians from cars, and you do quick time events. A lot of quick time events in this game, I must say, which is I don't know, for the bosses it's a little underwhelming. We'll get to the bosses, but for a lot of like these street crimes, you have to do quick time events to like rescue civilians. They're fairly easy though. You're not really going to ever fail a quick time event in this game. So yeah, the street crimes, there's basically like 15 street crimes in each neighborhood, and a lot of it is basically just defeating like a bunch of goons that are like maybe robbing a bank or something like that. Very, very simple stuff. It's the one thing that kind of drags when you're trying to get the platinum, because it's always going to be the last trophy you need. It just takes a long time to do 15 street crimes in each environment, in each district. because they kind of spawn as you're going throughout the city on the map. They're not just on the map immediately. You got to actually do a little bit of searching for them, but they'll pop up pretty frequently. But even if you're doing every single one you come across throughout the entire game, by the time you finish the game and do everything else, there's going to be a lot left that you're going to have to do. Yeah, the side quests, the side content in this game, it's similar to what you've seen in many open world games. For the most part, it's fairly repetitive and rote. But it's because the core combat in this game, or the core mechanics and upgrading and swinging around is fun. The side content is reasonably entertaining, and because everything is on your map and there's just not an overwhelming amount of it, it's satisfying to do, and you want to do it. You feel like you want to do it because you'll level up your character, which we'll get into that now. The upgrade system in this game, again, nothing too complicated. Something you've seen in many open world games before. You get experience from fighting enemies, doing side missions, things like that. You'll level up. Every time you level up, you'll get a skill point, and you have skill trees. And it's for the most part they're fairly not important, but they're pretty good abilities that you'll want. And the fun of this game is basically deciding where you want to put your skill points, looking at the skill trees and seeing like, oh, this is going to be very useful for combat encounters. This for swinging, or do I want this? Do I want that? The max level is 50. By the end of the game, you're probably going to be level 50. It doesn't take that long, so you have all the skills eventually. It's just it provides enough of a element of choice in the beginning to make it pretty fun. Even though it's not, it's something we've seen a million times before. Like every game these days has to have like leveling up in a skill tree, essentially. But it's fairly well handled here. There's also suits that you can wear, and this is cool. I really like the suit system in this game, where basically there's a bunch of suits that you can unlock. A lot of them unlock later in the game, depending on how far you get in the story mode. Basically, they each have a suit ability tied to them, and to buy a suit, you need tokens, and tokens you get from doing challenges across the city, doing those science challenges that I mentioned earlier, or maybe doing the street crimes. You get crime tokens. To do those 4 hideouts, you get hideout tokens. There's challenge tokens, different types of tokens that you'll need to unlock these different suits, and each suit has a suit power tied to it. And once you buy the suit, you unlock that suit power for good. So you can wear like an older suit, but have that newer suit power. So the suits are mostly cosmetic, but you can equip one suit power at a time. And there's a bunch of really cool ones. They give you like this ability that you can use every time there's basically there's like a meter that fills up the more you damage enemies. And then once that's fully filled, you can use your suit power, and then it uses up the meter. I experimented with quite a few of them. I still found the best one was one of the early ones where you jump up in the air and web everything around you. It's just really good for crowd control. Like if you find yourself surrounded by enemies, just use that, and a lot of them will get stuck to surfaces and they're down for the count. So I tried a bunch of them and I liked quite a few, but that's the one I kept coming back to. I really liked that one. But a lot of the suits are cosmetic. There's a lot of cool suits in this game, I gotta say. Really cool cosmetic suits. My favorite one was the one that's got like cell shading to it. It's like the vintage 60s Spider-Man suit. It looks so cool, the cell shaded look of it compared to like the realistic city. That I stuck with it for like the rest of the game. I thought that was like really cool, that suit. There's also gadgets in this game as well. A lot of different gadgets, and you can upgrade these as well with your tokens. So there's like a spider robot you can send out that like shocks enemies. There's like this stun gadget that stuns enemies. That's really useful. The gadgets are extremely useful. Now, I didn't use them that much at first, and because of that, I felt like the combat was actually kind of kicking my ass, at least on normal mode, especially in the beginning. It was easy to get overwhelmed by enemies. But once you start using the gadgets, you have like a little cooldown on your gadgets, essentially. You can only use like a couple at once. But if you keep switching between them and use them for different situations, the combat gets easier. Like the stun one I thought was extremely useful for like the bigger enemies that are a little harder to stun and damage. There's like the spider bomb that will kind of blow up and like web a bunch of enemies at once. I thought that was very useful for crowd control. There's just your standard I guess it's like a web ability where you have like 6 shots of your web spinner, where you just shoot an enemy a bunch of times in a row and they might get stuck to a surface. There's the impact web, which is really cool, where you can shoot at an enemy and it will like kind of send them flying, and if there's a surface nearby, they'll get stuck to it and then they're basically dead. Very useful gadget, and I really liked upgrading these gadgets. It was really cool. I really thought the gadget system was well implemented, and I guess we should actually talk about the combat now, which is one of the best parts of the game. A lot of people have brought up the Batman games as far as the combat goes, and it's got elements of it, but I don't know. I think it's a little different from those games. It's got the same meaty kind of feel, and when you punch enemies, it's got the same, almost like the same sound effects and feel to the game. It's also got that thing where if an enemy's about to attack you, they'll have like this little symbol over their head, and the more like it's hard to describe, but the more like white it gets, the closer they are to connecting an attack with you. And if you dodge at the very last second, you'll do like this perfect dodge essentially, where it will slow down time for a little bit and you won't get damaged. And later in the game, you can get even abilities where they can get stunned after doing a perfect dodge, which is really useful. So there's this cool ebb and flow to this combat where enemies are just going to be surrounding you constantly in this game, and the trick to it is really trying to know, or basically knowing where all the enemies are and which enemy is going to attack you first, and then appropriately dodging, and also just flying around and using your movement abilities when you get too overwhelmed. And they kind of build the combat up in interesting ways. Enemies get pretty tough later on, especially the Sable enemies, which a lot of them will have like shock batons. A lot of enemies in this game have rocket launchers and machine guns, and you got to actually dodge bullets and rockets. A lot of cool abilities in this game where you can actually like grab rockets midair with your web slinger and like throw it back at enemies. You can pick up objects in the environment, swing it around to like stun enemies and throw at enemies as well. There's stealth takedowns, so you can kind of like, now this is where I think it's similar to Batman. You can kind of like hide on like perch, like you basically perch on top of like railings and things like that, and like use your web slinger to like do perch takedowns where you'll web them up and bring them up, and then you basically knock them out. But you have to make sure there's no other enemies looking at you. The stealth in this game is fairly simplistic, but it works well. It's one of those things where it's fun to kind of like scope out environment and try to get as many stealth kills as you can before getting caught. At that point, you're free to do, combat, which is my favorite kind of stealth, where you don't immediately fail, which we'll get to that. One of the parts of the game I really don't like, but yeah, the combat is just super meaty. It's satisfying. There's a lot of different ways to take out your enemies. It's varied. And it's fun, and it's overwhelming at first, but once you kind of like start learning, using your gadgets, kind of understanding how the combat works, it's really fun. I gotta say, it progressively gets more challenging too throughout the game. Like some of the later enemy types are they're almost obnoxious in a way. You have to really be careful with them. And then you have like quick time events too, with some of the combat as well, which is like kind of whatever. Boss fights, I will say, are kind of underwhelming in this game. A lot of them are just basically like dodging attacks and then like throwing objects at enemies or at the boss to stun them, and then basically attacking them a bunch. Or basically like dodging attacks, throwing an object at the boss, and then like a little symbol will appear above their head, like a triangle symbol. You press triangle, and then you go up to them, you hit them a bunch, then you back off, and then you keep repeating that. A lot of bosses boil down to that, and then quick time events will randomly come up that you'll have to do, which is a little disappointing. I mean, they're still kind of fairly enjoyable because it's still that same combat engine, but yeah, I don't know. They feel a little lazy, the bosses. There are some cool moments later in the game where you'll fight like 2 bosses at once, and some of those are fairly decent. And the final boss fight I thought was fairly entertaining, and there's a lot of spectacle to it, even though the actual boss fight itself is really, really easy. All the boss fights are really easy, I gotta say. Yeah, probably one of the more underwhelming parts of the game. I think a lot of people have been saying this. I do wish they put a little more effort into the bosses. But the stealth segments are... Okay, I gotta talk about the Mary Jane and Miles Miles is in this game. I don't before I played this game, I didn't even know who Miles was. I've never heard of him before. That's how much I know about Spider-Man. But okay, so there's the pacing in this game can kind of like take a halt when you have to do the Mary Jane sequences. Basically, they're all these stealth sequences where you have to hide behind hide behind cover and kind of sneak around enemies and get to certain locations. And if an enemy sees you, you instantly fail and you got to go back. Now, they're not as bad compared to a lot of games. If you fail, the checkpoints are actually pretty lenient. I'm sorry, stealth sequences where you instantly fail when caught are like, they just fucking suck. They're never good. They're never good in any game. They're always tedious, and they're never fun. And especially in a game that has no stealth otherwise. When it does, you just get into a combat encounter. Like, you know, I don't mind stealth where it's like when you fail, it's like you can kind of recuperate, I guess, where you have, you know, you might have time to kind of like recover. But when you instantly fail, it just kind of discourages experimentation. And these stealth segments, to be fair, they're fairly easy for the most part. And there's one later in the game that's not too bad because you can actually get behind enemies and actually do a stealth takedown on them, which I appreciated. That one wasn't actually all that bad. But the other ones, like, even though I didn't fail that often, when I did fail, it was fucking frustrating because I was like, oh great, now I have to fucking do this trial and error garbage all over again. And also, they're very scripted, these stealth sequences. They want you to do them in the exact way the developers intend. If you do the slightest thing like off of the developer's path, you'll fail. And I fucking hate that. I hate that in every game. I hate it here. Just any time I would come to a Mary Jane sequence or a Miles sequence, I was just like, fuck. Because I knew I was going to hate it. And I, for the most part, I did. And you know, I might be having fun doing combat and traversing, doing a Spider-Man mission, and all of a sudden the pace of the game just stops dead in its tracks to give you this obnoxious stealth segment that I just fucking hate. Developers, please stop doing this. Stop putting instant fail stealth in games that aren't stealth games. It doesn't even have to be a non-stealth game. Just stop with this instant fail stealth bullshit. It's never been fun. It's never been good. It's fucking horrible. Stop. I gotta say, it's one of my biggest pet peeves with games, and they keep doing it, and I don't understand why. No one likes this shit. Anyways, whatever. That's my rant for today. I hate that shit. But admittedly, it's not as bad as in a lot of other games. But anyways, that's my rant for this review. Anyways, I think that about covers the gameplay. Again, nothing extraordinary, but it's fun. The game's fun. It's fun to play. It's fun to 100%. The combat's fun. The swinging around's fun, and for the most part, I enjoyed the gameplay in this game and the mechanics of this game. Okay, visuals. It looks amazing. I mean, they put a lot of effort into making Manhattan just look absolutely stunning. The character models are all nice. The human character models in this game look incredibly realistic. It's one of the best looking games I've seen, especially on a PS4 Pro. It just looks amazing. I mean, you know, obviously the budget on this game was super high, and it shows. I'm not one for graphics that much, but I was impressed by the way this game looks. Especially the cell shading technique they used for that one suit, I thought was really well done. But yeah, the attention to detail is just it's remarkable. There's really nothing to complain about with the graphics. There's not even a lot of pop-in that you see with a lot of open world games because it's so densely detailed, the city, so it's kind of hard to notice. The load times, I guess, are a little long because they have to load this giant city at once. There is fast travel. That's another thing I forgot to mention. That you do unlock fast travel eventually, so that removes a lot of if you don't. But I mean, it's so fun to swing around anyways. I don't think it's totally necessary, but it's in there anyways for like those super long distances you have to travel. But yeah, there's not really much to complain about with the graphics. The game looks fantastic. Audio, voice acting. is amazing. I think Yuri Lowenthal did the voice for Spider-Man. He's mostly been in like anime games and anime, in fact. But he does a remarkable job here. It really felt like this is how Spider-Man should sound, and he does a good job with a lot of the more humorous quips that he has. And I did laugh at some of the dialogue, but most of it I thought was maybe a little on the lame side. But yeah, the voice acting across the board was top notch, especially in the more emotional moments that I mentioned earlier. All the voice actors did an incredible job, actually. Music is kind of, it's your typical Western game. It's a fairly bland, like, I don't know, like, I mean, it kind of fits the game. It reminds me of the music that you hear in like the Spider-Man movies, like really over the top, kind of not quite orchestral, but like, kind of more like bombastic, like kind of music to kind of fit like the situations that you find yourself in this game. But yeah, it's not music you'll be humming to yourself. It's not music that you'll remember after you finish the game. But I mean, it fits well enough. It's, I like to call it the typical AAA Western game soundtrack that kind of just sort of fits the situations, but it's never going to really impress you that much. So I mean, I guess it can be disappointing in a way, but I've come to expect this from games like this now. And almost games in general. I honestly, this is maybe a rant for another video, but other than indie games, I find like soundtracks in games these days just don't do it for me. And it's one of the more disappointing things about the state of like modern gaming is just music. I feel like they just don't put effort in anymore. Maybe that's not fair to say, though. I think it's just melody is far less important these days, and it's just, I don't know, music just doesn't grab me. Every game is just, orchestral, boring, bland, and orchestral soundtracks, and it just, I don't have anything against orchestral music. It can be done well in games even, but a lot of them are just really bland. But anyways. Aside from that, like the sound design in this game is really good. Like the sound effects when you're attacking enemies are just really like, I don't know, they've got like this impact to them. Like the web sound effects are all fantastic. Like swinging throughout the city, has great sound design to it. Really good like sound effects and just like audio in general, especially when you have like headphones on. Very well done. So yeah, presentation wise, I mean they pretty much nailed it. I mean it's it gets the style of Spider-Man down as well, like as far as like visuals and sound. Really not much to complain about there. Anyways, I've been talking for 30 minutes now, which is crazy, but yeah, I enjoyed it. It's got problems. It's it's got that typical open world structure where it's not doing anything extraordinarily new, and the stealth segments fucking suck. But I had a blast with it. I had a lot of fun with it. It did maybe get old. I don't know. I think like this main story took me like maybe 15 hours. I don't know. It got a little. I don't think repetitive is the right word, but I don't know. I got a little tired of it, maybe a little towards the end. But I don't know. Just as you're getting tired of it, it does pretty much end. And the side of content was actually mostly enjoyable to do. If you play this game, you'll probably find yourself going for the platinum and doing all the side content because it's reasonable. It's reasonable, and I appreciate that. But yeah, this game's well worth playing. This is one of the better games of the year, and I was pleasantly surprised by it because, yeah, I wasn't expecting much from it. Now, a lot of people have called this the game of the year, the best game of the year. I don't think this quite stacks up to God of War, for instance, or definitely not Monster Hunter World. But I am glad I played it. Maybe if I spent full price on it, I would be maybe a little less kind on it, but I just borrowed it, right? And I think it's the perfect game to like rent or borrow, honestly, because you can get through it so quickly. I know you can 100% it so quickly, but yeah, if you have a PS4, even if you're not crazy about the character like me, I think you'll still find enough to enjoy here. Full price, I don't know, maybe you want to wait for like a sale. It is a first party Western game on PS4, so Black Friday and Boxing Day in Canada, it'll probably go on sale. I don't know how much, but it will probably go on sale, and that would be a good time to pick this game up, I think. It's certainly well worth playing, whether you're a Spider-Man fan or not. If you're a Spider-Man fan, you've already played this game, and you've probably already enjoyed it. What did you guys think of this game? Did you like it? What did you think of these stealth segments? Maybe I'm alone here. Maybe I'm like the only person that actually hates these things, and that's why developers keep putting them in their games. But whatever. Anyways, enjoyable game. Quite liked it. Nothing amazing or anything like that. It's a solid like 7.5, 8 out of 10 type of game, I feel. But that's it, guys. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.